Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this month's episode of Behind the App, where we'll be taking a deep dive into a really cool and technical Salesforce Labs solution. If this is your first time joining us, we do have this show running every month on the last Thursday of every month, where we take a look at a new Salesforce Labs app. I'm Stefan Chandler Garcia, a senior developer evangelist here at Salesforce, and I'll be introducing you to the creators behind some of these awesome apps. Now, before we get started today, please know that you should be tweeting and hashtagging Behind the App to reach out with any questions you have about today's session or to let us know what you think. You can also respond in the chat and we'll be able to get to you as we go through the session. Now, before we kick off with the episode, once again, I've just got to let you know about what an awesome program Salesforce Labs is. And it's a really great program that encourages Salesforce employees to build out solutions for the App Exchange that you can go and download and use for free. Now, to make that even cooler, most of the code is hosted on GitHub, so you can go take these apps and customize them to your own business process. It's something that a lot of our customers do and really helps you from having to go and create these apps from scratch when they already exist. If you want to engage with Salesforce Labs, you can follow them on Twitter at Salesforce_Labs or on the App Exchange if you check out the link below. Now, getting into our program, once again, welcome to Behind the App. If you've not been here before, some of the format that the episode takes is we really go through and we take a look at meeting those Salesforce Labs builders and those Salesforce employees who put the time and effort into putting these apps together and putting them onto the App Exchange and supporting them. Next, we're going to take a demo of the application and we're going to do a technical walkthrough, and our guest today is going to show us some of the really cool aspects of that app. And then lastly, we're going to solve for X, where we look at 3 technical challenges around the app and how the developers solved them. We're going to be focusing on the user interface, how the app interacts with the data layer, and really how it acts in context with the rest of Salesforce, and really take a look at those from a technical perspective. Now, I think it's time to introduce us to today's builder, and today I'd like everyone to meet Chris Gilmore, who's a solution engineer at Salesforce. Chris, thank you very much for joining today's episode. Could you let us know a little bit about yourself and what you do at Salesforce?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Stefan. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Gilmore, and I'm what's called a solution engineer here at Salesforce. Other companies may sometimes call this as sales engineers, but essentially what it is people that become product experts in the various parts of the Salesforce platform. Some people are generalists. Some people focus either vertically into an industry or horizontally into a product line. But our job is really about building relationships with customers, listening to their challenges, and then co-creating these cool visions or prototypes of solutions that they could get excited about, and ultimately, hopefully, create programs around.
That's
yeah.
Great. I mean, a lot of people know, if you've watched the past couple of episodes, my first role at Salesforce was in the solution engineering part of the business as well, where I was a technical architect, so looking after more so the platform and sort of really core platform solutions for customers. And like you said, doing proof of concepts, really taking them through that art of the possible, but still getting hands-on with Salesforce in the same sense, not just like doing demos. And so we still got to do lots of really cool stuff. Now, is this your first foray into Salesforce, was working for Salesforce, or did you do anything with Salesforce before you joined?
No, so before Salesforce, like a lot of Salesforce employees, you kind of get sucked into this ecosystem prior to joining Salesforce. So I actually worked at a partner in the area. It's a company called Time Trade, very small company that focused on doing appointment scheduling for like retail and retail banks. So that was kind of my introduction to Salesforce, and started going to all the Salesforce events and all the cool Dreamforce things. And ultimately, met more and more people and found an opportunity and position here at Salesforce.
That's great. I mean, everyone here knows that I've definitely drunk the Kool-Aid many times and have been for many years. Were you part of the community at all? I know I used to attend all the user groups all the time, present as much as I can. I mean, and it'd be literally every week in London, one user group. We'd have the Marketing Cloud user group one week, the admin user group, the developer user group, and I always found myself sort of jumping around and sort of meeting as many people as possible in that instance.
Yeah, we did. So in addition to going to the events like the World Tours and the Dreamforces, we definitely connected into the partner ecosystem in the area. just to bounce some ideas around as we built this App Exchange package that we published to the App Exchange there. You wanted to kind of bounce some ideas around, see what's going on in the industry. So that community definitely helps with things like best practices and what other companies are thinking about and doing, and when new features come out, how they're using them. So really helpful. Lots of assets, lots of cool tools to use.
Nice. Yeah. So I didn't realize that the partner you worked for was building out App Exchange apps, which really leads perfectly into building for Salesforce Labs. I did the same thing. I built a couple of apps before joining, and it really led into wanting to really keep getting hands-on around App Exchange solutions, because they're on a totally different technical level to just building out solutions for a customer, because apps that you build for the App Exchange have to run in every single environment that they're installed into. You have extra security precautions that you have to take, and it really gears you up towards that. And so, like, the app we're talking about today isn't your first Salesforce Labs app. What other things have you built for Salesforce Labs?
Right. So the first app that I built for Salesforce Labs is actually a pre-configured Einstein chatbot called Rider. And Rider is a chatbot that allows customers to make, manage, and be notified about their field service lightning, or as we're calling it now, Salesforce field service appointments. So think of a digital engagement overlay to Salesforce field service.
Yeah, cool. Nice. That's great. I mean, it leads in perfectly to what the app we're about to talk about. But before we get to that, I do have to point out, it wasn't just you that worked on today's app. There was a large team of you working on this solution. I was wondering if you could take a second to introduce the team, maybe talk a little bit about how you got to know each other.
Yeah, so this is a team of people that I work with every day. Most of them, Sebastian, I think I know Sebastian's in Europe, and Chinakya is also in Europe as well. So, but the five of us are all solution engineers, so we kind of know each other. And Brian, Mark, and I collaborate almost every day. So that's how we kind of know each other. But ultimately, how we ended up connecting up for this solution was we were all kind of doing peripheral things that were speaking to the same concept. So when we were bouncing ideas around, we decided, hey, we should make a pack, kind of one pack that's like a toolkit to do what we're trying to do. And we'll talk about it later. So we kind of partnered up, and we actually used this Salesforce Labs LWC contest as kind of a catalyst to be like, okay, we need to get it done for this contest. Yeah. So that was kind of the compelling event to actually get it done. So that's what ultimately ended up happening.
Nice, that's great. I mean, it's a great opportunity to bring together employees as well, and get you working on something and really honing in your skills outside of that pre-sales world. And it really almost validates you as a developer when putting things like this together and putting that code out there into the world. Now, I mean, we might as well start talking about the app, and I'm really excited to have this one on because I have so many questions for you about it, because I didn't know that this was possible prior to seeing your solution. And that is the Chat Lightning Web Component Pack. Can you let us know a little bit about the application?
Yeah, so Chat Lightning Web Component Pack is something that allows you, it's a pack of different LWCs, but essentially what they allow you to do is bring rich content to chat windows. So when you think of Salesforce chat in a community where you might be talking or chatting with a chatbot or even an agent, a lot of times traditionally it's just a text-based conversation, but what this allows you to do is bring some rich content features and functions into the chat window, so you can create your own LWCs to enhance that experience. And we provide a list, and we'll talk about them later, but I think we provide like 7 or 8 ones to start with. But you can kind of use this as a framework to also create your own.
Yeah, I mean, what I found really cool about this is I wasn't actually aware of how technical you could get with chatbots in Salesforce. Yeah. And I was on a project back at the end of last year where we needed to run a little Apex out of a command in a chatbot. And we needed to go and check the business hours, and if we were currently out of business hours, returns different messages based on that, give the user different options based on those business hours. And I was able to write an invocable method, call it from the chatbot, bring back whatever results I needed. And so to know that we can now extend chatbots with Lightning Web Components, I think the possibilities are endless in creating those conversations. What was the inspiration behind the app and building that and putting it together?
So, I mean, I think each of the team members had a little bit of a different thing that inspired them. But from my perspective, it actually started with like, is there a way that I can send my current location? So think of like a service type scenario where you're broken down on the side of the road and you want to call someone or chat with, some service provider that's going to come out and help you from a field service perspective. How do you let them know where you are? Well, if you were doing that over chat, you would have to write out an address or something. So I thought, wouldn't it be cool if there's just an easy way that, it can just solicit my real-time location. So I forget what release it was, but I think it was last summer or maybe last winter, where they finally allowed the ability for you to override the chat window settings so that you could put in LWCs. Mm-hmm. So once they did that, that kind of opened up this whole new world of being able to put in some of these user experiences that just are not part of chat out of the box.
Yeah.
Sending your real-time location, then it becomes doable.
Yeah. So even more relevance to add to this. Back before I joined Salesforce, I worked and ran a partner that did a lot of consulting in government and local government in the UK specifically. And one of the number one asks is when customers are filling out forms to pinpoint a location. So if you're reporting busted potholes on the street, if you're reporting fly tipping or trash being dumped on the side of the road, you want to be able to pin your location and submit that. And I'm going to send this video to some people after this too. I know will really benefit from that going forward, because it's not a use case I even thought of in solving with the chatbot and a Lightning Web component that should be really cool. So I'll be taking a look at that code specifically after today's session.
If you watched our Dream, I think it was the Service Cloud keynote last year at Dreamforce, they actually had this use case with Pilot Flying J was our featured customer, if you remember from the Service Cloud keynote, where they had they didn't use this Chat Lightning Web component pack in the Service Cloud demo, but they could have. Yeah. Now that we have this technology, it was a similar use case.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's great to see. And so you mentioned that there are a number of components there in the pack. So I thought quickly do a quick overview. Generally, when we have apps on the program, we're going through more of the data architecture of the model. But this app doesn't actually have any custom objects. It's not using the data within Salesforce. So I thought it'd be great to talk about what components are there as part of this pack.
Sure. Yeah, and like you said, I don't think there's a single Apex class on this whole package. There might be one, but the whole idea here is they're just kind of ways to render different interfaces and then solicit that feedback that the customer might have when they're chatting, like if send current location, translate that then to text to send back to the chatbot. So there's really no server side code here in theory. So I could take you through some of the components that we bundled as part of the chat. And like I said, this is a framework. We anticipate other developers to come up with other UIs that might solve for things we haven't even thought of. But this kind of gives you, I think, a good starting foundation of some of the things that we thought about. So things like a date picker, right? If you're trying to ask for, a scenario where you're maybe trying to make an appointment, in the world that we live in with COVID today, a lot of things need to be by appointment. So curbside pickup, things like that. So if you're asking for information around, well, when do you want to come, in the chat window, instead of having to type the day, you can pick it from a map. Really simple. Record tile, if you wanted to display record information, but not just in text, we could kind of format it a little bit nicely, kind of like a compact layout. So we put in a record tile. HTML, which is kind of record tile, but even more open to any type of HTML you want to render. So we wanted to make something generic like that. File upload, if you want to ask for a document, say, while chatting with an agent, here's an easy way to upload it via the chat window. Flow, we think flow is going to be huge here. You can build a screen flow and then expose it in a chat window. And it can pass input and output parameters back to and from the chatbot or the agent.
Yeah, I think that really comes in handy when it comes to, obviously you can add a survey link at the end of your chat conversation, but if you can get that feedback in the chat before they even leave, I think you can have much higher completion rates, and I think that could be pretty cool as well. Obviously you have a survey component too, but depending on how complex you want the flow to be.
Yeah, well, you know Salesforce, Stefan, right? It's like we provide a bunch of different ways for you to do the same thing. So navigate that is a really cool feature where the chatbot can actually navigate you. So imagine you're going to a community for help with something, and you're asking the chatbot. The chatbot understands your request and notices there's a knowledge article that it can serve up to show you the answer to your question. Instead of having to do it in like this small little abbreviated text or give a link in the chat window, it can actually navigate the whole browser to that page, but still follow the user in that conversation. So something really cool there with Navigate. Survey, like you said, it's just very simple. I think there's like a net promoter score. There's also like stars, how many stars, 1 to 5, and then what you want the labels on the ends to be. So just if you want to ask a quick question in kind of a survey form, you can do that. Carousel, which is, you have 3 or 4 different cards cycling through where they can select a tile visually, so they can click a tile instead of having to type something. Mm-hmm. And then Google Map, this is where you can either display a mini Google Map inside of the chat window or ask them to provide their current location, and that'll send the lat long to the chat back to the chatbot or to the agent, which then you can use to process however you want.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there, and I think that just this is a starter pack for people to start getting creative with chatbots. I think is going to be really good. Something just quickly as an aside, is the repo currently are you interested in taking open source contributions towards it and maybe having this mega pack of Lightning Web Components?
Yeah, definitely. Open to that, and maybe when we have enough components, we can call it the Chat Lightning Web Component Mega Pack.
Nice. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people would be excited to be able to contribute back to that as well. Might as well get on with the demo. I think I'm ready to start taking a look at some of the components. So if we want to queue that up, let's go ahead and get that demo running.
All right. Okay, so I will show you a demo of this. When you install the package, it comes with a demo chatbot that highlights all of the different components in the pack. So I'll demo that demo chatbot to you. And really, it just kind of lists out all the components, and then you could see them being used in the demo scenario. Now, one thing to note, and we might talk about this later, is that right now, because you're running the LWCs, or because you need LWCs to run, this is supported in a community scenario where you have kind of that Lightning design system running. So if you were to kind of adapt this to take it out of a community and run it on your own website, I don't think that would work right now because it kind of needs the Lightning design system running under it, right? And you probably know more about that, Stefan, than I do. Yeah. But anyways, let's go ahead and start off this chat. And it's really just going to be a chatbot that lists out all the different components. So we could just kind of go down the list. The idea is if your chatbot or even an agent, we could talk about this later, runs into a scenario where they want to kind of get that date feedback from a customer, instead of asking reply with a date and you have to type out, September 15th, 2020, you can just go ahead and come in here and choose from a calendar picker right inside the chat window, October, let's go with Halloween, October 31st. And then, the chatbot will just come back and confirm that it understands what you chose, right? Mm-hmm. All right, let's go ahead and choose another one. So I'm gonna go back to the main menu here, and let's go to Google Map. This is kind of cool. I'm gonna show, there's kind of 2 examples here. One is you can put in a point of interest. So I'm gonna have the user type in a point of interest, but this can be generated depending on what your use case is. The bot might want to show a predetermined point of interest automatically, and it can just publish it here. Cool. But I'm just gonna say Boston, where I live. I'm gonna say Boston, Mass, and then notice how the chatbot comes back with this interactive embedded Google Map right inside the chat window. Cool. And there's ways that you can adjust the size of this too. Those are parameters.
Oh, great. And you said you can pass text into the component as well. So if you wanted to pass it the city already, you can pass in parameters?
Yes. So it does. You don't need to ask. I just did a demo where I'm asking the user to show the map, just so it kind of makes it even more real. Yeah. But yeah, you don't need to do that. You could just bypass that step altogether.
Cool. Great.
But anyway, so the other thing is you have this little button down here that you can say, send my current location. in which case it's going to use the browser to determine what your location is in lat long. And hopefully this will come back and confirm that. And it's just going to confirm the lat long in this case. But obviously, in a real use case, it would use that for something and maybe not display it to the user.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see another one. HTML. I just have something silly here to demo for now, but we can see what that looks like later in the bot builder.
Yeah. No, I'm excited for that. I'm excited to see what you can do with the HTML there.
Yeah. Let's look at file upload. So file upload is, now this one's kind of cool because I just use the out of the box file upload Lightning Web component that we already have, and I just dropped it in this LWC pack. So I didn't really have to write any code for this one. And here we can just let's see. Let's take something, not my pay stub. Let's take just a happy face here. So it'll use all that existing functionality we have of uploading files. You can go ahead and click done. And then you tell the bot what you want to attach it to. So in this case, it's attached to the chat transcript object. But if you had a case up or something like that, you can tell the component where, once the file is uploaded, what record does it get attached to?
Yeah.
So that's kind of neat.
Yeah, I mean, file upload's always something that garners a lot of interest, and I think we'll definitely have to talk about that later, and how it manages and deals with permissioning, what context the bot runs in as well. So we'll touch base on that, I'm sure, as we get into the Software X.
All right, so you can click that and go to the record inside of Salesforce, but in the interest of time, let's just keep going here. Record tile, this is kind of cool. It's going to show me, in this demo scenario, it's just going to show me a bunch of cases. Now, this is all standard so far. It's just showing me my cases, and then I can choose one of them. But once I choose one, it's then going to show me that case on a tile. Mm-hmm. And in this scenario, I just kind of show the case subject, the status, and the priority. But this is configurable to show whatever fields you want in whatever type of compact layout you want.
Yeah, that's great.
All right, let's go on. Let's keep moving on here. Navigate to record. Let's see what that is. So I think let's take a look. So there's some weird stuff in here, but these are some knowledge articles in this case, or no, it's a case. These are the cases. So if we choose a case, let's choose this one and see what happens. The chatbot should automatically now redirect the page to this community page that's showing me the case, and kind of continue on in the chat. So it's kind of like guided. It guides the user around the community depending on what they're choosing.
Yeah, and I think the fact that it keeps that context of the chat as well is going to be super important to a lot of our customers. Yeah. So being able to move people around while chatting, I think that's really cool.
Yeah. I think you might see some test stuff in here. We were testing to make sure that you couldn't do any type of injection.
Yeah, all part of App Exchange building.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Anyone who's gone through security review knows that one.
Oh, they recognized it right away.
All right, so let's continue on here. Let's look at carousel. So carousel is cool. I just have a generic flame and heart, and you can kind of put in your own content there and your own picture. But essentially, you got this little carousel. I'm going to click the heart, and then the bot's going to come back and say, you selected heart. Now notice, here's the thing that actually took a lot of time. There's no place where it shows my selection. There's no chat it doesn't just automatically chat back. Well, under the hood, that's what it's doing. It's automatically chatting back heart, but I'm hiding that so that the experience is just I'm just clicking it, and then it's confirming what it knows I clicked.
Yeah, cool.
So we'll talk about that later. Yeah. Let's continue on. All right, the next one's probably the coolest one, flow. So here you can embed a lightning flow, a screen flow, right inside of the chat window. So let's go ahead and just show how you can put in some input. These are different these are different input fields on a flow. Really, whatever your flow is here, it'll show up here. The only thing you have to make sure you do is make sure that it works inside of such a small window, right? So you have to make sure that your flow is designed for that. But let's go ahead and click next. Now here's the coolest part. This is the last step in my flow. I'm going to click finish. And what happens is the bot comes back and confirms the output variables from the flow. So that was actually pretty hard to do. But the cool thing is you can kind of get those formatted output variables and even pass in input variables to your flow inside of the chat window.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Okay. I think there's one more. Survey. So this is really simple. If you just want to show something maybe I need to change that CSS a little. If you want to show kind of like how are you enjoying this? Love it, hate it. You can configure that and post the 5 stars. And then the other part of there's 3 things in the survey. The next one is around Net Promoter Score. So you can show the 1 to 10. And then the last one is kind of a multi-select checklist. So if you wanted to ask a question like this, select all the products you're interested in. I'm a little biased because I'm interested in Service Cloud, IoT. I'll throw in the Heroku because you're a platform SE, former platform SE. And we'll go ahead and click OK. And now it confirms, my selection there.
Cool. Nice. I think that's all really cool. I mean, I can't believe that you put all of those components together in a pack. But I mean, between you, I assume you sort of like divvied them up maybe and said, I'll take this one. I'm going to do surveys. I'm going to do flows. Or was it a collaborative effort throughout?
So it was kind of both of those, right? So Sebastian, I believe, already had the flow one done. Because that was like this use case he was solving for. I already had one done around the Google Map. And then we kind of took all of the ones that we had done together or that we had done individually. And then we also tried to list, okay, well, what are some other components that might be useful? So that's where we came up with the idea of the geolocation. That's where we came up with the idea of the survey. And then, we just kind of divvied out who was going to build what.
Cool. No, I think that's all really cool. So how does this all work in the bot builder? Can you show us that and what it looks like?
Sure.
And how, because I'm kind of curious how you determine which components you're showing.
Yeah. So the cool thing is it doesn't really require, and let me see if I can, I have to, all right, let me go into the bot builder. Oh wait, it's over here. Okay, so here's the bot builder. And here's this sample bot that we just looked at, that demo bot. So let's look at something simple first, which was the date picker. So if I go to the date picker dialog, all I do is, and this is kind of the format for all of these LWCs, all you have to do is basically say in a message or a question, depending on if the LWC is soliciting feedback or not. Maybe it's just displaying something, like the HTML would be a message block, it wouldn't be a question. But a date picker should be in a question because it's waiting for the input back from the user. So the bot asks for LWC : date picker, and then what we'll see later is when we override the chat window, it's listening for that code. So LWC : and then something. And if it has LWC : and then one of these components names, it won't show the message. It won't show this, right? It'll show the actual component itself. And then wait for feedback in terms of a date. Okay? So that's all you really need to do in this case, if you want to use, for example, the date picker.
Yeah.
Just instead of saying, well, you'd still say select the date or whatever you want it to say in the message. But then your question, instead of saying respond with a date, you just put this in here and it'll just render the date picker for you.
Cool. I think it's just interesting to see this view because I would assume that a lot of our viewers today haven't been into the bot builder before or seen that tool. And I just wanted to point out that anyone who wants to get access or try out the bot builder, you can activate bots as a feature in your Scratch org definition. And so if you want to even just try it out off of your production org, add it into your Scratch org definition. It'll activate the license in the Scratch org, and you could get in and try out bots for yourselves. Same thing with this pack if you wanted to download it as well, to start playing around with those and see if it's a feature you might be interested in as part of Salesforce. Cool.
Totally.
Is there anything else in the demo that you wanted to cover, or should we go in and start looking at some of these technical challenges?
Let's take a look at the flow one too. So the flow. Now, the interesting thing to note while the screen's loading is that the actual bot builder isn't even aware of these components. Yep. Okay, there's nothing in the bot builder that's tied into these LWCs. We're going to see how that works later, but essentially we're having the bot say predefined things that we're then going to catch in the client side of the chat window. Okay, so when you're doing this, you're just going to have to kind of read the instructions to know the right codes. But there's nothing in the bot builder that's tied specifically to this chat Lightning Web Component pack.
So there's no here's a drop down of your Lightning Web Components, pick which one you want to show.
Right. Yeah. That's not how it works right now. I mean, ideally it would. You'd be able to kind of do that. But right now we're overriding the chat window itself, not the bot.
Cool.
Okay.
Yep. Gotcha.
So in this case, the flow, and this one has a little bit more variables. So we're saying, again, a question because we're going to get the response. We want to get that JSON back from the flow that has the variables in it. Mm-hmm. But you'll see, we see LWC flow, but then we have the name of our flow, right? So that's the API name of the flow that you want run. Mm-hmm. And then also we put in another variable for, how tall you want the window to be.
Okay, great. And thank you very much for that demo, Chris. I personally can't wait to download the app and try it out, and hopefully a lot of our customers are inspired to start using the app as well, especially those of you who use communities, obviously. So now to my favorite part of the episode, we're going to talk about solving for X and how a lot of these technical challenges were actually solved in the design and the build out of this application. And so today in our Solve for UI, we're going to be focusing on building that conversational chat UI, as well as some of the challenges that have come from moving from writing components in Aura to Lightning Web Components. Next, we're going to be talking about solving for data inside of an app that doesn't really have data, but kind of does in a roundabout sense. And we want to talk about how those challenges are solved by designing and developing on top of the bot builder, who's really managing a lot of those transactions. And then lastly, we're going to talk about solving for composition and how you can communicate with the chatbot through the Lightning Web Component. As Chris mentioned a minute ago, the Lightning Web Components aren't actually in the bot. They're almost like taking over and being inserted into that bot. And I think that comes with its own challenges in communicating with messages as well. And so it'll be great to see some of the ideas behind how those were solved. And so, starting out with our UI, as we've been talking about, that bot window isn't very big. We've got a really small area of real estate to work with. And I thought, Chris, it'd be great if you could talk about sort of designing and thinking about how to approach these components from a build perspective.
Yeah, sure. So on here, I listed 3 of the different components, which I think represents 3 different types of scenarios we ran into from a UI perspective. So the first one's the date picker, where we actually had to build the UI from scratch, just because we didn't really have a LWC to kind of use as a foundation to override. So we actually had to build this just in HTML, mm-hmm. And be able to be responsive and kind of handle the events of the user clicking, the next month, previous month, or the date. So that's something where we had to build from scratch that sub Lightning Web Component. Mm-hmm. And then the file upload is kind of the extreme opposite of that, where we just took an out of the box Lightning Web Component that exists, which is the file upload. So you might even recognize that component. And we just kind of put it in a wrapper for this chat window. So we didn't really even need to write any code, that comes with its own set of parameters, like which record do we attach it to, what file extensions do you want to allow? All of those are just configurable parameters on the LWC. And then flow is kind of a mix of the two, where obviously we're not designing the UI of the flow, but we need to kind of get everything hooked up right. And flow, actually, we had to do something even fancier. We couldn't just have an LWC flow. We had to have an iframe inside of an LWC iframe, which then shows a community page URL, which then has an Aura component in it. So there were some tricks we had to do to get the flow work. And there's a variety of different reasons why we had to do that. I don't believe there's a way in LWC yet to have a flow, like a generic flow that you want to pass runtime, run this flow on the fly and pass these parameters. I don't think we can do yet.
That's correct.
So we had to kind of skirt around it with an iframe and an Aura component.
Okay, I'll definitely be checking out the code for that to see how you approach that, because I'd love to have more flows as my Lightning Web Components. If anyone out there is listening, so hopefully that's a feature that we see very soon.
Yeah, totally.
So onto the date picker. Did you use a third-party library for the calendar functionality?
I think we probably use, I'm trying to remember. I think we probably used some like sample code we found on the web, but we're not referencing like any external JavaScript or anything like that.
I mean, because if that's the case, I mean, if anyone wants to play around with getting third-party libraries into that chatbot as well, I'm sure the amount of things that you can do with it would be endless.
Totally.
I mean, I've already got some ideas spinning around things that I'd like to try out within chatbots and Lightning Web Components. But I think that's a great example. Just something I want to point out about the flow is that this team have done as much as they can to help you design the UI of the flow inside the chatbot. Be mindful of how many fields you have on that page, because the last thing you want is to be selecting a flow that has like 10 fields and have the user scrolling through a chatbot. So that UI then comes into the customer's perspective and to our developers. So please develop your flows sensibly, especially if you're going to be putting them within the chatbot. It's just a tip from there, and use the same design principles and thinking that this team have used when putting together the app and working inside of that small window. And so something that we hit upon, we were having a discussion about the app before we were prepping for this episode, was the differences and challenges moving from being a developer working in Aura to then moving into Lightning Web Components. And I think one of the first challenges that we all hit when making that transition is conditional rendering and understanding how to dynamically show aspects of your component when you're passing in specific parameters and variables. And so, Chris, I was wondering if you could talk to a little bit about this and how this component challenges it and some of the issues you faced.
Sure. So this came up because of the fact that we have like a lot of different LWCs in this pack. We have in our base LWC kind of something that says, okay, here are all the sub LWCs, and which one are we going to show, depending on the code that's returned from the bot. So we have a lot of conditional logic where ideally, if it was Aura, we would just kind of have it as an expression, and we can use like one variable, like the show title, so that we would see, okay, if it's Google Map, then we'll show that. If it's this, we'll show that. But because you can't put an expression for these if statements in LWC, we had to have a Boolean for each specific component. And then in our controller, that's where we had to set 10 different values, 10 different variables instead of just one. Mm-hmm. So minor headache, but ideally it would be cool if we had an expressions in LWC.
Yeah, I mean, while I agree with you, I know from a performance perspective, I mean, LWC is just so much more snappy than Aura components. And I think this has a lot to do with it, the way that it's compiled, but it does bring in a different thinking to the way that you should dynamically hide and show content. Big time, especially when it comes to child components. I thought it'd be interesting to look into the code here within that chat pack just to see how you're managing those. And I see here, obviously, within the connected callback, that's where we're then getting those details from the message.
Yeah, so every time a message appears in the chat window, it runs this method here, this connected callback. So notice how we have to have all of these lines of code to set each one of these variables. And if we add more to the pack, we're going to add more lines of code there to set each of them to true or false.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where that comes in.
Cool.
And then in the HTML, we have different, the different template sections for each of them. And, in theory, only one of them is going to be true at one time.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
I mean, very cool. I mean, I guess you could technically show some really complex combinations of Lightning Web Components if you really wanted to, but that wouldn't be great design for your users in that chatbot. Yeah, I think this is really cool. It's a great way of solving the problem to be able to see that. And it's great for developers to be able to go and reference how this was done so that they can go in and see that in future, or even make a copy of this and add in their own internal Lightning Web Components into their chatbots as well. I think that's great. A classic UI challenge that I think a lot of our customers have been there. Maybe some of them haven't been there yet, and this will be super useful to them to see how that is solved within Lightning Web Components. Now, the next in our challenges are our data challenges. And this we kind of touched on a little bit when it comes to overriding it, but I think if you could talk a little bit more about how the chat window and the Lightning Web Component and the bot builder all kind of work together from a data perspective.
Yeah. So the place where we actually inject this LWC pack is where we override this chat messages component, right? With the custom component that we give you in the managed package. Mm-hmm. So this is all configured in the embedded service deployment, where you set up your deployment for chat. So whether you're using a bot or not, it's just, this is where it hooks in, so that you can connect this chat LWC Lightning Web Component pack to override the chat messages. And then that'll cause that connected callback to run anytime a message appears in the window.
Cool. And is this the one we were just seeing?
Sorry?
Is this the component we were just looking at?
Yeah, so the component we were just looking at, that's what's hooked, that's what you're connecting right here. This custom component, that's the LWC chat pack.
Cool. Yeah. Great.
So again, that's in your embedded service deployment.
Yeah. And then the bot,
mm-hmm.
just kind of pushes that text. So I see here we have like that bot asks. Is this what's being pushed into the LWC?
That's being pushed to the message. Yeah, if you didn't override the embedded service deployment, it would just show that text.
Cool.
Right? So it would just show that LWC date picker text. The bot would just show that. Right.
Yeah. And so if I go into the code here, I've got to pick your brain while I've got you on here. So I'm assuming that chat message is coming into this component, and is that the string message here?
No, I don't believe that is this dot message.
Cool. So this dot message.
Oh yeah. Sorry, we do set it there. Yes, cool. STR messages this dot message content dot value. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, and then that's where we're saying, okay, we're making sure that it's an agent, and then if the message value starts with LWC, do something.
So there,
GMAP, LWC date picker.
Yeah, so line 36 is interesting because what happens is the chat actually sometimes turns things into emojis. So I'm stripping out the emojis because if you were to type like colon and then I think
of course,
greater than, it'll put in like a smiley face and it screws up the whole thing that we're going to use downstream. So I'm actually stripping out emojis there.
Cool.
On line 36, I forgot about that.
So for everyone, that is the most important part of the component, is to strip out any emojis before you start trying and analyzing your chat messages. If you've had a bug and given up, that's probably the solution there.
Yeah.
In this instance. Oh, cool. Okay. And I see how. So we've got the LWC date picker. So it's identifying that chat message and then rendering the date picker. And I'm assuming if all of this is false, then we just show the actual message.
So if you go back to the HTML, you'll see, scroll down to the base text visible. So the default chat template is just showing the text. Yeah. So that's what lines 4 through 8 are showing you, is base text visible, which will be true if all the others are false.
Yeah, cool. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Now that's great to just get your head around how that communication is actually happening between that bot builder and the Lightning Web Component. I think that's really, really cool. And a really interesting approach to doing this.
So the other cool thing that you can do now that I'm just thinking about it is, let's say you didn't have a bot. Let's say it was an agent that was chatting. and you kind of wanted to leverage some of these components, you could actually set up quick text, right? Quick text for the agent to, say LWC date picker or LWC file upload with whatever parameters you want, so that the agent could actually ask for files to be uploaded or whatever. So it doesn't even necessarily need to be a bot that's doing it. You could have use quick text with a live agent chatting back and forth to leverage this chat pack.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That can get quite clever, but clever programming isn't always good programming. So it's always understandable as well.
Yeah.
Cool. And then so the next challenge we talked about was permissions, because obviously we're uploading files. We have flow. What lessons did you learn around permissions in this scenario?
Yeah, so it's a little tricky, especially when using a bot, because a lot of things, like from the server perspective, the bot is running as whatever user that you identify in the bot builder. So I think default it's using some internal user that's a chatbot user, and then there's a permission set in your org that you have to give if you want the bot to be able to do things. Okay. But now with a new, I think it was like again last summer, we allowed the ability for you to change and have the bot run as whatever user you want.
Okay.
But that actually is not the context of the LWC, because the LWC is running client side. And that is in the context of whatever user you are in the community. So if you're logged in, if you're not logged in, you're the site guest user. If you are logged into the community, it's now whatever whatever permissions that you have as a user. So even though the bot might have access to data that's not that you don't, you might not have access to do things like seeing the case on the record tile, even though the bot could technically return the case in text to you.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of a discrepancy there, and you need to make sure that the context of the user in the community is what you're using to show all of that data.
No, that's interesting, and a challenge that we see quite a lot now with some of the changes to guest user permissioning. And so I'm sure it just must be test always to make sure that the users are having the correct access as they're accessing the components and can see that. I know flows can run in system mode now, as far as I'm aware. Because have you tried running a system flow as system mode in the component, or does it still take on the permissions of the user? Because obviously it's in Visual Force, in an Aura component, in an iframe, so it's all over the place. Do the permissions persist?
I believe so. Yeah, you're running it as though, because it's showing an iframe of a community page that has a flow on it.
Fine.
So
you're authenticated to that community.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
So I don't think it's using any of the system stuff.
Cool.
Probably not.
Great. Perfect. Permissions, one of my favorite and least favorite challenges of all time.
Well, as an SC, it's one of those things that we never really have to worry about, right? Because we're always demoing with the admin users all the time.
Yes. Yeah.
But when you talk about a real solution, that's when it comes, like half of the solution is just figuring out all the permissions.
Mm-hmm. Yep, big time. And now, speaking of that and some of those challenges, I think our last challenge that we wanted to discuss was composition. And this one threw me for a loop. I didn't really get this the first time we talked about it until I went in and looked at the code. But we talked about sort of sending messages as the user, because the user's interacting with those Lightning Web components.
Yeah.
And you need those messages to come back. So can you kind of explain this a little bit, why it's a problem?
Yeah. So if you think about it, and these boxes, I think, do a good job, you have your community, but then you have kind of the page, and then you have the chat component. Mm-hmm. And then inside of the chat component, you have our LWC pack. Yeah. Right. So there's a lot of different levels of things that Locker is going to probably be worried about. And when we try to, from a sub-Lightning component, tell a parent of a parent to then say, okay, send this message back in the chat window, mm-hmm. because that's really the only way to pass information back to the bot is the user typing a message, mm-hmm. right? But we're just kind of hiding that, even though that's how we actually have to have it work. Yeah. We run into issues with Locker. So the way that we had to get around this was that our subcomponent is going to do a post message to a parent which in this case is the community.
Mm-hmm.
And then the community, that level has access to this embedded service library, which then has, there's a method in embedded service called post message. So that's where we can tell the chatter to send this message in the chat window.
Oh, cool. Okay. And so just dipping into the code, because I went and explored this a little bit too. So this is pretty much the code that you want to add into then that script tag in the head of the community. And so you're just kind of binding an event listener to the page.
That's right.
So that it can listen to the message from that component. Okay.
Yeah.
And then that just takes the message and does the message then come into the bot builder? Is that where the response is coming into, or? Yes,
it goes into the bot builder. So anything where you're soliciting feedback from the user would be in a question block on the bot.
Yeah.
And then that's saved in whatever slot you say for the bot to save the response in.
Okay.
Now, we tried to simplify this even more by hooking all of these connections up for you if you were to create another sub Lightning Web Component. Because remember, it's a sub-component inside of our parent component. So there's already 2 layers just on the Chat Lightning Web Component pack. So if you look at if you go back to the LWC chat pack HTML, if you click that, you'll see that each one of these, sub components has a parameter on it called on post message. Yeah. So if you set that on post message handle post message, what that means is your sub component will be able to communicate to this parent component to then send the message. So if you go to handle post message, that's where we actually create the post message for you. So you don't, if you were to create another sub component, you wouldn't have to do this. You would just call that event that we already have set up for you.
Cool. I mean,
so if you take a look at like the date picker.
Yes, let's go.
Actually, you know what? This one's too come. Yeah, let's look at that. So this is a lot of stuff in here. This might be
so setting the
scroll
date
down to somewhere near the bottom. Right.
handler.
Scroll down. I think it's on. Yeah. Oh, right there.
Yep.
So line 232. So all you have to do in your subcomponent is just do a dispatch event and then put in the value that you want the bot to get back from your subcomponent.
Okay.
So that's all you would need to do if you were to add or extend this packet.
Cool. I know that makes total sense. It's great to see this almost as like a framework for adding components into chatbots. I think that we can really take away and start working with and innovating.
Yeah.
I think that's really cool. In my cookie consent application that I have on the App Exchange, we have to do a lot of the same thing in order to access and manipulate the DOM cookies in the browser. And so having to communicate with that script in the head, I think is a good pattern and pretty well documented now on a couple of websites for sort of a best practice for communicating with the DOM from within Locker, only in communities. You wouldn't want to be doing something like this on platform, but please take the guidance from our security team and all of our security docs when making decisions and using components and communities in this way. I mean, and that's sort of, I think, given me a great overview of this component pack, and I think will be like a huge benefit to our users and our customers and developers who just want to see something new that they might not have known that you could do within Salesforce. So the first thing you need to do, if you go to this URL to install the chat pack, go through, click on the link, you can get access to the GitHub repo, you can modify the source code, you can bring that into your org, you can download it from the App Exchange. There are loads of ways that you can interact with it. So go check out this pack and really play around with the application. Chris, if there was anything like you could tell users about sort of building for bots, maybe give them a little advice, where would be a great place for them to get started?
For bots specifically, I think Trailhead does a really good job, I think, of introducing you to bots, especially because they now have these challenges where it actually steps you through building a bot. So that's how you can really get your hands dirty with chat bots. The other cool thing, like you mentioned, Stefan, was that a developer org gives you all of these things to test out for free. So you can enable bots, you can enable chat, you can test out this entire solution in the dev org. Or others. So I definitely recommend that. And if you are a customer of Salesforce already, you might want to talk about some accelerators that we have around chatbots, or even something that I've helped put together called the Build a Bot Einstein Workshop, where we can come in and do like a 4 or 5 hour session where we'll take people from IT, we'll take people from the business, we'll take people from marketing, and everyone walks away with a fully functioning bot that they've built in their own little developer org. So there's lots of different services around and assets around getting familiar with bots. So those are just a few that I would note.
Cool. No, that's great and super useful. And so thank you again for coming on today's program. I think it's been great to really discuss that. I do want to point out next month's episode, so our October episode of Behind the App will be featuring my app, Community Cookie Consent, because we've been getting a lot of questions about it recently, how it's built, what sort of exists behind it. So we thought we'd take a step back and feature something and do a really technical deep dive into my brain and my thinking behind this application that I think a lot of us should find very useful. And lastly, thank you to everyone for watching today's episode and for tuning in each month. And thank you to Chris for being a guest on Behind the App. If anyone has any questions, please reach out to us. You can find me on Twitter at StefanWCG or by email at stefan.garcia@salesforce.com, and I'd be more than happy to get any feedback or information to Chris as well. Please catch this episode on replay, catch next month's episode, go back and see some of the original episodes, and let us know what you think, because we're providing this as a great way of really getting behind the minds of developers here at Salesforce who work for Salesforce, which is a perspective that you might not be usually seeing. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.